Hi and welcome to Programming Percy. Today we'll be having a look at learning NeoVim. Many years ago I tried NeoVim for the first time and I ran quickly. It was hard to configure and I really didn't understand what I was doing, so I kinda gave up. Now, some time ago I decided to give it a new try, and I'm super thrilled that I did, because it's just so amazing to work with when you know what you're doing. Sadly, I see a lot of developers asking, why spend a few hours setting up an editor when you can just use Visual Studio Code? And I agree somewhat, but if we're going to work with a tool every day in our job, is it really such a bad thing to invest a small amount of time making it really good? The reason why I do recommend NeoVim for people to use is because it's super customizable. You can really modify the editor to become whatever you want, to behave the way you want. When you press this and that button, do this. And there's really no limits to what you can do. The con of NeoVim is the same argument. There's stuff that you need to configure. It takes some time to configure, but once you get the hang of it and once you learn how, you'll notice that it isn't actually time consuming and it's actually really easy. It's just in the beginning it might seem a little overwhelming, and that's why we're here. This tutorial tries to provide you with the tools needed to get started with NeoVim. I won't give you the perfect IDE configuration to use, which makes your editor look amazing. That's not what we're doing here. If you're only after that, you should search for people's dotfiles, which is the way we reference the dotfiles because they're hidden files that you use to configure NeoVim. And you should search for them if you're only after a full, complete configuration. This tutorial aims to teach you how to create those configurations by yourself. And I don't expect any previous knowledge of NeoVim or VI. We will cover everything as we go. And you know what they say? Hand a developer an IDE and he or she will code, but hand a developer the ability to configure and customize his IDE and they will become developer gods. At least I'm pretty sure that's what they say. Let's get going. The first thing that you need to do to get started with NeoVim is installing it. I recommend going to the NeoVim GitHub by searching on Google for NeoVim GitHub. Going to Wiki, and at this location you have information about how to use it. You also have installation instructions, which are great, so go ahead and at this place you can find how to install it. You should select the most stable release, so it's a lot easier to work with. There's installation instructions for you here. As you can see here, for Linux as example, which I use, I need to download the NeoVim tar file, extract it, and then simply run the binary. You can find the files below here. So you could go ahead, copy the link, and switch to a terminal and do a wget for that file, and it will download that file. And once you have that file, untar it using tar, xwf, and the name of the NeoVim file. So once you downloaded it and untarred it, you can execute NeoVim by using the binary found inside the folder which was untarred and then /bin. As you can see here, I have the NeoVim binary. We need to add that to your path. I have mine inside of a file called bash aliases, but you can use bash rc or whatever you use to add your aliases. And as you can see here, I have an alias called NeoVim or Nvim, and it's pointed to that binary. You can also just add the NeoVim binary into your bin path. It's all up to you how you add it. Let's go ahead and close that. So once we've added NeoVim as a binary, we can start configuring it. Configurations by default goes to your home folder /.config/nvim. So this is the default path that it will read from. So I'm just going to go ahead and create that folder and move there, because this is the place where we will be working. Once you start NeoVim without any configurations, by executing the binary, it looks like this. Nothing special, but not so shabby. Beginning to configure NeoVim is what I hear people are scared of many times. It's confusing, but it's actually not so confusing once you get started. You've opened up NeoVim like me. You're going to shut this down. You can see the prompt here saying type :q enter. So that's actually how you enter commands. So if you press shift and hold them and then :, you'll see here at the bottom you get a : prompt. And this is the command prompt where we can enter commands. And what I'm gonna do is go ahead and type Q and enter, and that will close NeoVim. Q is short for quit. Shift plus : is how you trigger the command prompt, and that's important to, if you are not familiar with VI, that's really important to remember. So before we configure it, we actually need a plugin manager who can help us configure and download plugins for NeoVim. Everything you do in NeoVim is usually changing the configurations or downloading plugins to help you. So it's really good to have a plugin manager. We're going to use a plugin manager called Packer, and Packer can be found on GitHub as well. What I recommend you to do, enter their GitHub and scroll down to the quick start, and it will show you how to download it. I'm using Linux, and you can see that they clone the repository and they actually move it into .local/share/nvim/site. Don't change this unless you know what you're doing. Just simply use the command, because this is the default location where NeoVim will look for stuff. So just copy the command, run it in the terminal, and it will install Packer for you. So copy the command from their GitHub, paste it into your terminal, execute that, and you will have Packer installed. To begin configuring NeoVim, we need to create a new folder. And that folder should be placed inside your home path at .config and a folder called Nvim. So go ahead and create that. Then we will go there. So once there, at this location, we will store a few files. So let's go ahead and create the file which actually starts up Packer, the plugin manager, and initializes it. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a new folder in here called Lua. Configurations in NeoVim is done using Lua scripts. And if you name a folder Lua, that folder will be automatically checked whenever we import the scripts in NeoVim. So inside Lua, I'm gonna go ahead and open up and create a new file called plugins.lua. This file will be responsible for handling all the plugins inside of our configurations. So the first thing that we will need to do is press I to go into insert mode. And then we're going to require Packer, which is the plugin manager. Once we've required that, we're going to execute the startup function and pass in a anonymous function like this. So we require Packer, we call the startup, and we insert a function. And our function, you can see that we have use here, and use is a way to import other plugins. Let's add a comment here. Configuration is going here. In our case, we want to manage Packer itself as a plugin. This allows us to update Packer whenever there's an update that needs to be done. What we can do is, after we've added Packer, we can press escape to leave insert mode and go back to normal mode. Press Shift : to open the command tab, and type in W to save the file. If we restart NeoVim, nothing is going to happen. We have only created a script that loads in Packer, but we haven't told NeoVim to use this script. So we need to do that. NeoVim has a special file called init.lua, and init.lua will be automatically loaded once NeoVim is started and executed. We will go ahead and use the inbuilt explorer to go there. Press Shift: to open the command tab and type explore with a capital E, which will bring up NetRewriter, and as you can see we have the plugins Lua, which we just created, and we can go up one step to the parent folder and we can see our Lua folder, which holds our Lua configurations. And at this place we will be wanting to create the init.lua. So I'm gonna go ahead and press Shift %, and it will open up a command tab saying enter file name, because we're creating a new file, and I'm creating a new file called init.lua. And this file I will go into insert mode by pressing I, and this is the file that is executed by NeoVim once it's started. And what we will do here is that we will require plugins, which is the plugins.lua file that we created. Note, you don't have to write lua/plugins.lua. You don't have to do that. It's enough to simply say plugins and it will know it's a Lua file inside the Lua folder. So once again, press Shift: to open the command tab, press right. Now I'm gonna go ahead and restart NeoVim, and nothing has changed, as you can see, but we have added the ability to run Packer. So we can go ahead, Packer status, and we can see we have no plugins available so far. And it brings up this little tab where it shows us the output from Packer, which is nothing. So press Q to go back. Go into the command tab, Shift: type Packer sync. Packer sync will download and install plugins for you. It will remove any plugins that are not available in your configurations. So it's a great way to keep track and keep your plugins updated. Packer sync. So in short, what we have done so far is that we have learned how we can use Packer to import plugins. We have learned that NeoVim has a init.lua file, which we can use to load our configurations. We can run commands by pressing Shift: such as the Packer sync or Packer status, and we can navigate using the explore command. So let's press Q to bring that tab down, and let us add a few more plugins that we will need. Now, since we're going to learn how to use NeoVim as an editor, I think it's good that we would install some language server support. And to do that, I'm actually going to use a plugin from William Bowman, and you can find links in the descriptions to these plugins later so you can see more about them. But Mason is a plugin used to help you install code-related stuff such as DApp servers or LSPs and stuff like that. We're also going to use his LSP config NeoVim plugin because that's used to configure it. And then we will also download a plugin called NeoVim Nvim LSP config. Now LSP config is used to run different language servers, and it's needed for these plugins to run properly. So once we have added these plugins, Mason to download and help us set up LSPs, and NeoVim and LSP config to configure them. Once this is done, let's exit the insert mode by pressing escape, Shift: and write the file. If we do Packer sync now, it won't actually, so I'm gonna go ahead and do it. Packer sync, it won't actually do anything. It won't detect the changes. I'm gonna go ahead and close that. We need to reload the file, either by exiting Vim or reloading it in line. We can do that. So let's do Shift colon to open up the command tab. Type Lua file and a percentage sign. What this will do is that it will reload the current buffer. Now the buffer is the file. So it will reload the buffer into memory again. So that's the same thing as closing it and opening it up. It's just a little bit more easy to do that. So let's go ahead and do Shift colon and type packer install. You might as well type packer sync. Packer install will download and install the plugins for you. It won't remove old ones. So it installed 3 plugins. That's great. So let's press Q to exit. Now, one thing that I need to clarify is that Packer downloads the plugins for you. It doesn't configure and enable them automatically for you. That is up to us. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, in this example, we're going to set up GoPLS, which is the Go language server, to help us code in a Go related file. But you can really use this approach for any language that is supported, which is most of them. And we're going to enable our first language server. And we're going to use Mason to do this. So actually, I'm going to go ahead and create a new file. So Shift colon, type explore. And you can see right now in our Lua directory, we only have one script, which is the plugins. I'm going to go ahead and add a new file here. So you can do that, Shift, percentage sign, and then enter the file name. And I'm going to call it masonconfig.lua. This file will hold all our Mason configurations. Remember to not name the file the same way as the plugin, because there will be conflicts if you do it. For instance, if you name it Mason, it will be a conflict. Press I to go into insert mode. And we're going to require Mason and call the setup function. So we used Packer to download Mason, but now we also need to configure Mason to work the way we want. And each plugin has a setup function, which will set it up with the default settings, which is fine for us right now. Let's use the default settings. Now we're also going to use the Mason LSP configuration plugin. And again, we're going to call the setup function to set the defaults up. Press escape to leave insert mode. Shift colon and W to write the file. And once that is done, we're not exactly done yet. We need to do the same thing in the init Lua that we did with the Packer. So go ahead, Shift colon, explore. We go up one level and we go into the init.lua file. So the same thing that we did here. We told NeoVim to load in the plugins script. We need to tell it to also load in the Mason config script. I'm gonna go ahead and save this file, Shift colon W, and then Shift colon Q to quit. I'm gonna open up NeoVim again, and there shouldn't be any difference. So we can check our plugins and this is really useful when you're trying to set something up and it's not working, because that will probably happen sometime. So go ahead and open the command tab, Shift colon, type in check health, and it will show you the health of all the plugins that are currently installed. Now, one thing you need to know about Mason is that it helps you install tools for development, such as GoPLS. However, it does require you to have the binaries or the programming languages installed. So you can see here, it tells me I do have Go installed, which is great. I don't have Cargo, for instance, and I don't have Node. And if you don't have Go installed, it won't be able to download GoPLS for you. So you can still use Mason, even though I don't have Cargo, but I won't be able to do Cargo related stuff using Mason. We need to install that first. In this tutorial, we will be using Go. If you don't have Go installed, now is the time to pause this video and go and find the Go and go into Go download and follow the instructions to download and install Go if you want to follow along. The things that we will learn here will actually work for most of the programming languages, so you could use another language if you're more familiar with it. But if you want to follow along and do exactly the same, download Go from this link. I will put it in the description. Once you have it installed and put it in your binary path, you should be able to see Go here. Okay, so check health. Super useful to check the health of the current plugins. So I'm gonna go ahead and type Q to simply quit and close that tab down. We did install and configure Mason, so let's go ahead and do Shift : to open the command tab. Type in Mason and you should see this really nice looking pink screen. Now in here you can see we have LSP, DAP for debugging, linters for linting, and formatters, which Mason can help us install. This is a long list, and you probably won't know the name of the language server by default. But if you're interested, for instance, I know GoPLS is related to Go. And we can see up here, there's a language filter by pressing capital C. And capital C, when you see that in NeoVim configurations, that is actually control. So capital C means control, and then F. So if you go ahead and hold control, press F, and it will open up a new tab, and that will have all the programming languages that we can apply as filters. So as we see here, Go is number 47. So I'm gonna go ahead and press space until I get to the bottom, and I'm gonna type in 47, and this will apply Go as a filter. Now I'm only seeing Go related stuff, and if I go down here I can see GoPLS, and we can press enter to see a little bit more information about it. Now we want GoPLS, so I'm gonna go ahead and do Shift : to open up the command tab. I'm gonna write Mason install GoPLS, and you will see that it starts downloading Go. If you don't have Go installed, it will complain here telling you that you don't have it. Okay, so it installed GoPLS for us, which is nice. We can go ahead and press Q to leave Mason. That was really simple, but there's one thing that we need to know. We installed GoPLS. We still need to configure it. The same thing we did with Mason and others, we need to apply. It's really simple. It's really the same thing as we did before. So I'm gonna go ahead, Shift : type explore, and inside here we can see we have we have the two configurations as before. I'm gonna go ahead and Shift %, and I'm actually going to create a GoPLS.lua. And GoPLS will hold the configurations related to GoPLS for me. And I'm gonna go ahead and configure it so that NeoVim knows how to use GoPLS. So the first thing that we want to do, I'm going to insert mode, and I'm going to require the LSP configuration from the plugin so we can attach GoPLS to it. And the way we do that is we create a new variable. We assign it the value of require LSP config. This will import the LSP config library, allow us to use it and configure it. We're also going to use the util package. So require LSP config /util. Now we have imported the plugin, we can start configuring it. Now you can use this plugin to configure many language servers. The way you configure a language server is LSP config dot the name of the language server. You can find a full list in their documentation. I'm going to put links in the description. I know it's GoPLS, so let's go ahead and call GoPLS, and we will call the setup function. And the setup function, we will close it with brackets. And inside here, we can start configuring it. To run GoPLS, it's a command line tool, so it will use GoPLS from the command line and it will use serve. This is how to start GoPLS. We're basically telling NeoVim how to run this plugin. And we want to configure the file types to run it on. And I want it to run whenever I have a .go file or a Go mod file, for instance. You can add more files. You can really control this to work the way you want. And the root directory to use will be util root pattern go work. We will use go.mod and .git. This is basically the path to the root folder where the plugin will run. So you're telling it that start running from this path. So whenever we see a go work file, go mod file, or a .git, that will be the root path. Now we can also configure settings, and this is how the plugin will work. Now this is, if you have GoPLS running by default, you have to tell it what analyzer to use, for instance, and you can do that here in the settings tab. So we can do settings, and we can say GoPLS, and GoPLS is going to run, we're going to have the analysis to tell it what to analyze, and basically we will check for unused params, for instance. We want that, and we will also enable static checking. So this is how you would configure a LSP for GoPLS. Now, to do the same thing for example Rust, we would simply go ahead, we would do LSP config, so we would have code LLB, for instance. But let's not do that now. But hopefully you understand how we can customize the plugin. And if you want to know what settings are available, all of this exists inside the plugin documentation on GitHub. So it's really easy. When you see me writing this, you might think, oh shit, how will I ever know what's going on? But actually it's pretty easy. If you check it in the documentation, you will see they will have examples of everything, and it's not that hard. I'm just gonna go ahead and add those colons there because they are needed. So let's go ahead, let's leave the insert mode, shift colon right. Now we have one thing left to do, and hopefully you have an idea of what it is. We will need to update the init Lua to use the configuration that we just wrote. So let's go ahead, explore mode, let's go back one step up, let's go inside init Lua, and of course let's add it. So require GoPLS, and let's escape, shift colon, write the file, and let's exit. Now to test this out, I'm going to create a super small Golang program, and I'm just going to go ahead and do NeoVim main.go, which is, and you can see it's actually complaining we cannot have end of file. So our language server is actually working. I'm just going to go ahead, press I for insert mode. I'm going to do package main to just see a few things that they are actually working. So I'm going to create the main function, and I'm going to go ahead and do var test string, and I'm going to do fumped print line hello world, and press escape. And once I do that, actually we can see the language server is working, it is complaining, and it's telling me that I have errors in my code. I'm going to go ahead and just save this file anyways, because we will be using this later. So we're one step in the right direction. We can see errors, but I don't know if you noticed, but there's no code completion or suggestions, which is really important when we have an editor. So let's go ahead and add that. And to add that, we need to, drum roll, wait for it, add a plugin, same as always. So we will be leveraging a plugin from Hirsch7th. I think you pronounce it Hirsch7. Sorry if I pronounce it wrong. He has a whole suite of plugins in GitHub, and I will put links in the description to all of them. And I won't cover them all in details because there's quite a few of them, but while I write, let's try explaining a little bit what they are. So let's go ahead, let's go inside, oh sorry, wrong, let's go inside Lua, let's go inside the plugins again, and we're going to add plugins for code completion, for instance. I like having a few comments sometimes just to make it a little bit easier to understand what's what. So the first one we're going to use is Hirsch 7th / Nvim-CMP. Now this is the completion plugin, and it allows us to add completion engines to NeoVim. And the great thing about the plugin is that it supports many languages. Sometimes I see plugins which are related to one language. You install it and it does one thing. But this is really useful because you can use it for many languages, and he has a complete list of supported stuff on his website, and it's just, I mean, it's just great. So we're gonna be adding a few plugins. So at this point of time, I think it's probably good if you learn that if you exit insert mode and go into normal mode, you can press YY, double tap YY, and then P, and you will copy paste the current line that you're in. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. That's YY followed by P. So the first thing that we installed was the Nvim LSP, which is the engine. Now there's something called sources, which the engine then uses to add functionality to it. And we're going to add a few of the sources, and all of them begin with CMP, Nvim. So we want LSP source, we want a Lua source. I'm just gonna go ahead add a bunch of them. So we have Nvim LSP signature help, which is used for displaying function signatures with the parameters. And we're gonna do Nvim. Nvim LSP is used to add the language server as a source to the Nvim-CMP, which is used for code completion. So that's what we're doing. We're adding code completion sources here. It's going to be more apparent soon. So let's go ahead and do CMP vsnip, and that's used for adding and enabling and adding the ability to create Visual Studio Code snippets the same way, if you're familiar with them. I'm gonna add CMP path, and I'm gonna add CMP buffer. Now path is used for enabling the file system as a source, and the buffer is used for adding buffer words. Right, I'm also going to add one final, which is, oh sorry, let's copy that one. Which is the Vim vsnip. So there's gonna be links to all of these in the description, don't worry. Basically code completion with this one, and then these are sources which basically adds functionality to that completion. So once we've done this, let's go ahead, escape to exit insert mode, shift colon, write the file, shift colon, do a reload. Remember, Lua file, %sign to reload it, and then I'll run packer sync, and it will download all the plugins for us. And as we can see, it all downloaded perfectly, so that's great. Now, again, let's press Q to exit. And as always, we need more than just downloading the plugins. We need to configure them and initialize them. So I'm gonna go shift colon and explore command, and at this place I'm gonna do shift % to create a new file. I'm gonna call it code completion.lua, because all our code completion related stuff will go in here. One of the things that we will begin doing is adding a small pop-up frame with the code suggestion. you know, when we're typing, we want the code suggestion to pop up at the cursor. Now, one way of doing this is adding it to the Vim opt option. And there's a few options by default in NeoVim which you can use. I'm gonna go ahead here. I'm gonna paste in. I'm gonna go to the documentation. So whenever you're configuring NeoVim, it's great to know the NeoVim documentation is really good, I think. So you can visit here to see what options we have. And we want a completion option, and we want to display it as a menu. So we can go to the documentation, search for complete opt, and you will see a bunch of options that we can add to that. And I'm just gonna go ahead in my editor and type complete opt is used to manage code suggestion format, and we're going to say vim.opt, which is the option for Vim, and complete option is equals to. Now I want us to have suggestions pop up even when there's only one suggestion, because by default you won't have that. So I'm gonna go ahead and do menu 1, and you can find that by reading the documentation. So you can see menu 1, use the pop-up menu when there's only one match, and I want that, so I'm going to add that. I also want to add no select, which is an option that allows or forces the user to select one from the menu. And I'm also going to add no insert, which is an option to tell us to not insert the suggestion before we have selected it. Otherwise it will print it depending on what you select, but we want only it to be entered into the file when we select it. I'm also going to add the preview to show some extra information. Again, you can find what these options mean in the documentation on NeoVim. I'll put a link in the description so you know when you're building your own editor how to find these options. I'm gonna go ahead and close the browser now because we don't need it. So we added a few options that will modify how the completion will behave, but this is not part of the configuration. This is part of the NeoVim configuration. I'm gonna add one final thing, which is short message. So vim opt short mess plus c equals true, and this will prevent the messages from being excessive or very long. We want to use the CMP plugin for our code completions. So we're going to require in a variable the CMP, and then the same thing that we did with the language servers, we can now use the plugin and we can call the setup function, and we can pass in a object with configurations. So this object will hold our configurations. And the first thing we need to add is the sources that we added as plugins as well. So sources are installed that can be used for code suggestions. So it's the source for the code suggestions. So let's go ahead, add a sources option. It's going to be a object, and it will hold objects, and we will basically just add the name to the source, and that will enable that source to be used. And we can also configure them here. We will be doing that for some of them. So I'm gonna go ahead. Once we've added this, I'm gonna go ahead, press escape. I'm gonna double tap Y and then followed by P to copy it a few times, because we have a few sources like that. And I'm gonna go ahead and change the name to match the other sources. So we have LSP, and we're going to add a keyword length. You don't really have to worry about that. You can find, if you visit the CMP GitHub, you can find all the available configurations that you can use. And let's add all of the other sources. We had the signature help. We have Nvim Lua. We have now we have buffer. And we have the vsnip. And again, for some of them, I'm going to configure the keyword length. And let's add it to the buffer as well. And also, let's have a comma. And for the Nvim Lua, I will also configure the keyword length. What we have done so far, we have configured how we will show the code suggestions. We have configured the sources for Nvim CMP so that it can find suggestions. Now we also need to control the plugin. So for instance, whenever we have a suggestion, we need to navigate or switch amongst the suggestions. And we can do that by using mappings. Mappings is where all the fun in NeoVim begins. Mappings allows us to create keyboard shortcuts for executing commands. So in the case of the code suggestion dialog, we want to select a suggestion. We want to move to the next selection, for instance, without grabbing the mouse. Adding mappings is pretty easy. It can look a little bit scary the first time you do it, but let's go ahead and see how we can add them. Keyboard shortcuts to execute commands. Inside the plugin here, we're going to add a mapping object which will apply the mappings that we create to the code suggestion tab. To show you guys what this is, I'm only going to create one first, and then we will add a few after we've tried it. So to specify a mapping, we add the brackets, and inside the brackets we put the keys that we will press to trigger a command. So inside here we will put our keys. So we want to bring the code suggestions up. For instance, when I press Control Space, I want the pop-up to appear. So I'm gonna go ahead and do capital C. Remember, capital C is short for control, and then followed by space. You can just print space like that and it will understand. And when we do that, I want to trigger CMP mapping complete. And doing this will trigger the pop-up to appear. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a small comment to bring up the code completion at current cursor. So once we've added this control.space shortcut, we can go ahead and type Shift:\explore, because before our code completion will work, we need to go into init.lua and we will have to require the code completion script. So let's go ahead and add that. Press escape, shift right, and then Shift:\Q to exit. Now I'm gonna go ahead and open the main Go file again. So it actually complained a little bit inside my file. So let's go ahead and see if I can track that down. Right, my bad. We need to add a colon here. So add a colon after the configuration, or otherwise it's not properly configured. So go ahead, add that. I'm gonna go ahead and save the file. I'm gonna quit. And then I'm gonna open main again. And this time, whenever I press insert, I'm gonna write font dot, and as you can see, we're now getting code suggestions. We're getting these suggestions if I'm here, I do font.p, I can press control space and it opens up this menu, but I can't navigate inside of the plugin yet. I can probably use my mouse, but it doesn't really work as we want it. And this is because we haven't configured the navigation inside the plugin yet. So let's go ahead and add a few mappings. We need more mappings. So let's exit this file. Let's open up code completion again. And inside mappings, I will add a few mappings that I find necessary and nice to have. So for instance, whenever we press Shift-Tab, we want to go to the previous suggested item maybe. And at this time, I'm just going to go down to the configuration that we already have, press YY, up 2 steps, and then P to insert it. And I'm going to change here and do capital S for Shift and then Tab. So Shift Tab goes to the next item. And we're going to change, we don't want to call the complete, we want to do select previous item. So that's how we add more mappings. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a few of them. So tab to go to the next item, for instance. Again, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy the ones we have. So instead of Shift Tab, I want Tab, and not the previous item, but the next item. Let's have Control E to exit the suggestion. If we don't want to have any suggestions, we can press Control E to exit. YYP to copy. And I'm gonna go ahead and do at this location Control E, but instead of complete, I will do close. So let's add a comment explaining Control plus E closes the suggestion tab. Now, this next part is really interesting because we want to select the suggested item, and when we do, we want to have the plugin add the code that we have selected. So if I select a function as suggested, I want it to insert that into the file. And I want to do that whenever I press enter. So pressing enter or return will confirm and apply. So we need to add the setting, and the key for that is CR. CR is something that you will probably find in a lot of mappings. And CR stands for enter or return. And we're going to call the confirm function, and we're going to pass in a function. And inside of this, we will do there's something called a behavior. You can find out more about this by going to the documentation. But I've read it, so I know that we have something called a confirm behavior. And we can call it insert, which will make it insert the selected item into the file, and select equals true to make it happen if we only selected it. So let's go ahead and save the file. Now we have added a bunch of stuff. So Shift Tab, Tab, Control Space, Control E. So let's go ahead, save the file, Shift colon quit to exit. Let's open up the main file again. So we have an error at code completion Lua line 30. So I'm just gonna go ahead, open code completion, type Shift colon as the command, and we're going to insert 30, which will take the cursor to line 30. This line is acting up. So why is this line acting up? Let's see, do we have any errors? My bad. So whenever we're doing this, we don't want to CMD mapping, we want to do CMP mapping. That's really important. So let's go ahead, change that to CMP. Let's write the file. Let's go quit. Let's open up main.go again. And this time, see, font.print. And this time I can press tab to navigate inside, and I can press shift tab to go back, and control E, I can exit. And whenever I select something, so let's go ahead and do a print line, it also imports for us now, because that's one of the features that is added. So let's go ahead and say fixed code suggestions, which is amazing. So enter, test is still not declared, and it's going to complain. But our code suggestion is actually working, and we can select, and it inserts the selection that we have, which is really nice. It does look a little bit bad, to be honest, so far. As you can see, the description is kind of printed at the same location. It doesn't look really good, but we can configure this. We can make this look a little bit better. We can, for instance, go explore, and I'm gonna go inside the Lua file. I'm gonna go inside the configuration. I'm gonna add a new configuration, window for styling, for instance. So the window command takes in a few suggestions, a few options, which we can use to make it look, well, at least a little bit better for now. We will fix more sooner. So let's do window. And we can do completion, CMP config, window, bordered, because we want to add a border to the completion window. The documentation window, we also want to have a border. So let's add the same function to that. And this will make our code completion windows have borders, which really is probably something that will make it a little bit nicer. So let's take a look. Let's save this file and let's explore. Now we actually have to quit. And let's quit. Let's quit that. Let's open up the main file again. And let's see how it looks now when we added some borders. So font.print. And as you can see, it looks a lot better already using those borders. Now we can style this even more to sometimes if you have multiple sources and you want to know which source everything comes from, for instance, you can add icons, which makes it a lot more easier to see which source has suggested what. So let's go ahead and do formatting. And we're going to add the fields that we want to format. It's going to be, we're going to want to format menu, something called aber, and also the kind. So these are the items that we will apply to, and we're going to have a function which accepts the entry and the item. And we're going to add some icons, so menu icons. You can find out how to do this in the documentation. Again, they have examples of this. I wouldn't be able to do this without having to read the documentation first. So, you know, kind of always a good idea to read the documentation to see what you can change and what you can modify in each plugin. And I'm just going to add some icons whenever we see, if we have vsnip, for instance, we want one icon, but if it's from NeoVim LSP, I want another icon. We're just going to add that. And the idea is just to show, so let's see, let's just, whenever it's the buffer, let's add a B. When it's the path, let's add a P. Just make it really easy. Then the item, the format function accepts an item. and the item is what's being printed. So let's do item.menu. Let's apply the menu icon and entry source name. We have a map with the names of the sources. These ones have to match the name of the source. So as you can see here, I actually made a typo. It should be vsnip. And whenever we get an entry, we will check the name of the source, which will be then grabbing the icon from this list, and we will return the item. And let's print a end to this function, and let's also end that. We have added a few menu icons, so let's go ahead, let's write the file, let's close it, let's open main.go again, and let's see, we should see that it now prints. You can see the icon that is being printed in the suggestion, which makes it look a little bit better. So you can see this one comes from the buffer, so it shows us that it's B from the buffer, and the other suggestions are from the LSP. So it can help you understand what the suggestion comes from, which can be nice. Is it the current file or is it from LSP? So up until now, we have been using the explore command to move around inside of the files. And I'm going to be honest, I don't like it. Now, there's a lot of popular plugins to handle this. And I will show you one called Nvim-Tree, and I will put a link in the description. And installing it should be really a breeze for you now. So let's go inside Lua. Let's open up the plugins folder. When we execute use, we can actually add more stuff to this place than simply the name. So let's go ahead, let's add the name of the plugin, which is Nvim-Tree.lua. Now sometimes you will see sub requirements. So what we're saying is that to run this plugin, we will require another plugin. And the plugin we will require is Nvim-Tree /Nvim Web Devicons. Now this plugin is actually optional. So you can go ahead and skip it if you don't want it. It will add small cute icons to the nav bar that we will be adding. And installing it will require you to have a patched font. So if you don't know what that is, I suggest that you open up your browser, you go to www.nerdfonts.com. And nerdfonts.com is actually icons that are used for development, and they have examples. They have, for example, down here you have a font patcher, which allows you to easily install and patch fonts. And you need fonts to have this plugin show you icons. It's really easy to install. You can press the download and you have a lot of fonts to decide on, and they look a little bit different depending on which package you choose. But I recommend using the font patcher, which makes it really easy to have patched fonts. I won't cover exactly how you install that in this tutorial. If you have that installed, you can use the DevIcons plugin. Otherwise, you can skip it. If we have added that, we can go ahead and write the file and reload it using the Lua file command. And then, of course, we need to run packer sync, which will download and install the plugin. And this is cool because while recording this tutorial, we can see that the Mason has been updated, and we can see what has been updated also. So let's go ahead. We have installed the plugin for the File Explorer. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna use the Explorer one final time. Inside it, I'm going to create a new configuration file. I'm going to call it fileexplorer.lua. And the first thing that we will need to do is disable the regular NetRewriter directory explorer. And this is actually something that they do recommend in the in the Nvim-Tree GitHub. They say that this is the first thing that you should be doing if you're using the plugin. Disable the regular plugin. So we're just going to go ahead and do that using Vim-G loaded NetRewriter. I'm going to enable something called term GUI colors because that makes it look a little bit better. And we're going to require the plugin. So this is the same as the other plugins that we have been adding. We require the plugin and we execute the setup function. Now this time I'm actually not going to use the defaults. I'm going to add a few options. I want the Explore tree to open on startup. So whenever we start NeoVim, I want it to open up. Also, I want to add a option called buffer ignore on setup and set that to true for now. So once we added this, we can go ahead, press escape, save the file, go inside of the init Lua because we need to add or require the configuration file that we just created. And we called it File Explorer. So I'm going to go ahead and add it. I'm going to go ahead and add it at the top because I want it to load the Nvim-Tree in the beginning so it can disable NetRW. So it can disable the regular Explorer right from the start. I'm going to go ahead and press escape. I'm going to save this file and I'm going to quit NeoVim. And now the next time I open NeoVim, we will see a navigation tree. So you can see an icon for showing you that this is a Lua file. And you can see a small X. This is because I'm inside a GitHub repository right now. And it detects that and shows you the icon. It's showing me that we have modified or removed some of the files. So the Nvim-Tree is actually really nice. And you can navigate between the files by clicking in the tree file here. To navigate between the tree and the text file, you can either use the mouse by clicking, but you can also use Ctrl W and then press the arrow key towards the window which you want to move, which is useful if you have many of these tabs open, which can happen. Or you can press Ctrl and double tap W and it will move to the next current open tab. As you can see, my cursor jumps between. There's a few things you can do inside the Nvim-Tree. For instance, we can press A, which will open up a prompt to create a new file. And I'm going to call it newfile.go. And once that's created, I can press capital I. And I will see the file here. The reason why I have to press capital I is because by default, Nvim-Tree will hide files that are not inside of your Git repository. So unless these files are added to the Nvim-Tree, they won't show up. You can disable that if you don't want it. I kind of like it to have all my Git ignored files not show unless I specifically tell it to. So Shift I to remove or show hidden Git files. Now in my case, I don't want the new file.go. So I'm just going to go ahead and press D to open up the prompt to remove the file. Now this makes handling files inside of NeoVim a lot easier, and I really like that. So we can either press Q to remove the tree, or we can use the command provided by Nvim-Tree called Nvim-Tree toggle, which will open up or close the NeoVim-Tree. But running a command like that, it's not really nice, is it? That's a lot of work to open up a simple tree. So I'm just going to go ahead, open up the Nvim-Tree by calling the toggle command. Inside the Lua folder, I'm going to press A to open the prompt to create a file. And I'm going to call it costumekeys.lua. And inside this file, I'm going to open it. Inside this file, I'm going to fetch the key map function, which is used to create new key mappings. So I'm gonna do vim.api to find the Nvim API, set key map, which is a function. I press tab to select it. With map, I can create new key mappings. And with key mappings, we can execute commands, the same as we did inside the mapping for the plugin, but we can create them globally also. And I want a global command. And let's see, map the key n to run the command Nvim-Tree, because that's what I want to do. Whenever I press N, I want to toggle the navigation tree. So the first command here, the first input to map is going to be N. But this is not the key N. This is referencing normal mode. And normal mode is when we're not inside the insert mode. So if I press escape, I'm inside normal mode. If I press I, I'm inside insert mode. There's also visual mode we haven't covered yet. Now we want the command to only execute when we're in normal mode. And I want it to trigger whenever I press the N key. And I want the command to trigger to be Nvim-Tree toggle, but I will also add the key CR. And the reason to add CR is because otherwise we will only open up the command tab with the command pre-filled, but we will have to press enter to execute it. And I kind of want it to execute by default. So adding CR will make the command also execute. And I'm going to pass in the final argument, which we can skip for now. And once I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and save the file. Now, regarding the Nvim API, you can find in the documentation what's available. There's a lot available what you can do, but setting the key maps is really important to know, so that's why we're covering it. Before we can use this, of course, I'm going to switch to the tree again. I'm going to navigate upwards. I'm going to go inside init Lua, and I'm going to add the custom keys because we need to import the plugin. So custom keys script I want to add. So let's go ahead and save that file, and let's do a final command, which is QA. Now QA stands for quit, A stands for all, because if you simply press Q, it will only close one of the tabs, but pressing QA will close all of the tabs, which is useful. So go ahead and open Nvim again. Now the tab opens and the navigation tree opens as expected. If I press N now, it's going to close, and I can press N to bring it up. Great, this is really nice. This is a lot nicer to work with and will speed up navigating between the files a lot. Now you can resize it if you want to by simply dragging on the border and dragging it into the size that you want. Great, we can now have a navigation tree and we know how to create custom key mappings, which is really useful. So I don't know about you, but constantly pressing or writing the command W to save the file is kind of annoying. So I'm going to add a second mapping, which is Ctrl+S to save the file. And it's going to execute while in normal mode. And we're going to do N to say normal mode. When in normal mode, we want to press C, capital C for control, and then followed by an S to save the file. Then we want to execute the command, which is right. And then we want to also press enter to actually have it automatically trigger. And then we want to pass in the final parameter. We're going to save this file. We're going to quit all. And then I'm going to open NeoVim again. Open any random file. I'm going to remove the space here. And then I'm going to press Ctrl+S. And as you can see, the buffer was written. That's a lot easier than having to run the command. Now hopefully you understand adding these key mappings is really what's going to make NeoVim super useful, because using this we can add whatever command we want, and it's really helpful, and you're going to probably be adding a lot of these ones. We have a file tree, we have code completion, we have a language server which tells us what is wrong, we know how to bind keys to special mappings. I think it's time that we add a debug adapter, and adding a debug adapter can be done using Mason as before. So since in this example I'm using Delve, I'm just going to go ahead and install Delve, and it's as easy as typing Mason install Delve. I'm not going to show you how to find that Delve is available, because you should by now be able to use the language filter. So once Delve is installed, we need to attach Delve, and to attach Delve we're going to use a plugin called Nvim-Tree. So again, let's go ahead and open up plugins.lua. Down here in the bottom, I'm going to go insert a new row, and we're going to use a plugin by Mfusneger something. I can't pronounce that. Mfusneger. And he has a plugin called Nvim-Tree for supporting debug adapters. And using these plugins will allow us to kind of support debuggers for multiple languages. So let's go ahead, do Command write or Control S now. So we're going to reload the Lua file. So again, Shift : Lua file %sign to reload, and then : packer sync to install. So we installed the Nvim-Tree. Now the same thing as always, we need to create a configuration for the plugin. So I'm going to jump to the file tree, I'm going to press A, and I'm going to add a file called debugging.lua. And I'm going to open debugging.lua, and we need to specify which adapter to use. So I'm going to begin by fetching the plugin, fetch the dap plugin, and to do that we will create a variable called dap, and we will require dap. So this allows us to use the dap and configure it, and we will add delve to debug. So dap.adapters.delve, and whichever adapter you use, it will be the same. It will be dap.adapter. The name of the adapter. And you can find more information on their GitHub. And each adapter has their own specific configuration which you will need to apply, but it's all documented on the GitHub. So if you want to install another adapter, I'll put a link in the description. Just go there and check out the adapter. So Delve is going to be ran as a server, and we're going to need to bind a port to that so we can connect to that port. And we're going to use a parameter. We will see soon how we can fix that. Let's go ahead and do a executable. And the executable is going to be command equals delve. Oop, my bad. Delve. And we're going to pass in some arguments. These are pretty much always the same, depending on where you want to connect. So we're going to connect the dap to the URL of my local IP, because I'm developing on my local machine, and you could change this to a remote machine if needed. Oh, I made a big typo. It's supposed to be like that. I'm not used to this computer, that's why I'm misspelling a lot. So we say here that we're passing the arguments dap, we're passing the L flag and the local host and the port parameter as arguments. We have configured the DAP. We can add even more. So we can add, if you're familiar with Visual Studio Code, you can have different debug programs basically, which you can add parameters or environment variables to, basically to modify the debugger or the way you run the Go program. And we're going to add those, and they are called configurations in this case. And these configurations are going to apply to Go. So configurations.go. So each time we're inside a Go program area and run the debugger, we are going to have these options available. And here we can specify different types that we want to run when we debug. So we can specify the type, which is delve. We can say the name of the execution is called debug, for instance. And I mean, this could be basically anything, the name. It could be debug with no environment variables, for instance. And the request type is, in our case, going to be launch. And basically, what you put here depends on the program that you're going to run, the debugger, and you will have to look at the documentations to understand and know what you need to add. For a Golang program, this just kind of works. Unless you want to add or change anything. So I'm going to go ahead. This is going to run the current file. So we pass in file as an example. So this configuration will run delve. It will run on the current file. And we can add stuff for debugging test files, for instance. If we need to debug tests in Go, we can also add a configuration for that. And we can do the same thing here. We run delve, we name it debug tests, for instance, and we say it's a launch request, and the mode is test, and the program will again be the current file. Once we have these configurations, we can attach the adapter, and we have a few launch configurations. I hope that makes sense. Let's add a comment, launch configurations. So let's go ahead. We need to save this file. Exit insert mode, Control S. And then, as always, we need to also update init.lua because we need to require the file. Require debugging, and we will go ahead and save, and we will exit, and we will open up main.go and see. So an error again at line 4. I'm just going to go ahead and open debugging and see why. Debugging, line 4. Oh, found it. At this location, we also need to close the arguments. I'm going to go ahead and write quit all, open main.go again. Now, Nvim DAP doesn't come with any preset mappings or anything, so it's a pain to use in the beginning, but we will fix this soon. So to set a breakpoint, we need to run a command. So I'm gonna run a command called, it's a Lua command, and we will require DAP. You can do this to run Lua inside. And we're going to toggle breakpoint. And once we do that, you can see a B up here. This is a icon for a breakpoint. So we do have a breakpoint set. Now I'm going to run a command again, and this time I'm going to run Lua, require the plugin, DAP, and then continue, which will execute and start up the debugger. Now you can see our configurations here. We have debug and debug tests. In our case, we want to run number 1, debug regular, and you can see that it failed to launch. We actually have an error here. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that. remove the variable. I'm gonna go ahead and save the file, and I'm gonna rerun the debugger. So open command tab and press arrow up to rerun the old command. So I'm running it again, and this time I'm running number 1. And as you can see, the B is now replaced with an arrow indicating that we are currently here. The debugger is at this location. At this point, we want to see information about what we're doing. We can do Lua require, we can require the dap, and then we can go ahead and open a REPL and call open on it, and we will get the debug tab opening up. So if you go down using Control W and then you go to insert mode, it will add a new tab. It will add a new row here, and wait for your commands, and you can do .scopes and it will say locals, and we have no local scopes in this code. I guess we could go ahead and add some variable again and it would show. Debugging like this is not gonna cut it, of course. So I'm gonna go ahead and exit, and I'm going to exit this program, and I'm going to exit everything. I'm gonna open NeoVim again, and I'm going to add a few commands. So let's go into custom keys. I'm gonna create a new mapping, and Nvim dap key mappings. So for instance, we don't want to execute a command to start a debugger. I'm gonna make it so whenever I press F5, we run the debugger. When I press F5, I want to run the same command that we just did. So Lua require dap dot continue, dot continue, and then press enter, and then the command is done. And let's finish that. I also want to make sure that Control plus B sets a breakpoint. So I'm going to add inside normal mode, I want Control and B to execute the command require dap dot toggle breakpoint, and then we also again want to do CR to execute it, and then the final param. And let's go ahead and save this file. Now starting the debugger and setting breakpoints should be a lot easier. We will need some more mappings, because when we debug we will need to step through, we will need to step over, step into, for instance. I'm just gonna speed up and write them down here and add the comments as I go, and I'm gonna show you some nice things that we will cover. So we can do press Control plus I to set log point. If you're unfamiliar with log points, they're basically breakpoints, but instead they simply print something to the console to stand it out. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do, whenever we press Control and L, I'm gonna make it trigger a Lua require dap, Lua require dap, and we also need to make sure to have that command exit, and we're gonna go set breakpoint, and we're gonna pass in nil, and then the third parameter is going to be Vim function input, which will allow us to insert a message, and we want to have a small prompt, so message log point message, and we will exit the set breakpoint function, and then we'll want to execute it, and let's break that and the finals. So we can press Control L to set log points, which is amazing, and we're going to add pressing F10. Press F10 to step over a function, for instance, and I'm just gonna go ahead and add them. F10, and whenever we call that, we're going to do Lua require dap step over is a function, so let's call that, and let's close the command like that. We will do the same thing for step into and step out to. So I'm just going to go ahead and press YYPP, and I'm going to go ahead and change these to F11 and F12. I'm going to change the function that is called. So F11 will be step into instead, and F12 will be step out. And I see I made a typo, so it's going to be step, not set. So step in, step into, and step over. Now that looks a lot better. And let's see, we need to open REPL. We don't want to type REPL open each time we want to see the debug information. So let's go ahead. Oh, I'm gonna exit insert mode YYP, and I'm gonna have that on F6. Whenever I press F6, I want to call the function REPL.open, and I want it to execute, and basically that's it. So I'm gonna add one final mapping. So copy again, go ahead and change this, and I'm going to change it to DL. This is something that I do. You can set your mappings to however you want them. Well, DL for me is going to rerun the last debugger. So if I ran a debug and I made changes and I save the file and I want to run the same debugger again, I can press DL to re-trigger it. And you can do that using run last. So I'm just gonna go ahead, save this file with these mappings. Once we've done that, we can close all. I'm gonna open up the main file that I have again. And this time I'm going to show you that if we do var value, let's do value equals 10. And I'm going to say fmt print line value. Then I'm gonna go ahead and let's fix that. I'm gonna go ahead and press Control B to add a breakpoint, which we just set. I'm gonna press F5 and I'm gonna run the first configuration, and we can see the debugger stopped at the line indicated by the arrow, and we can press F6 to open up the REPL, and I'm gonna go there and I'm going to enter insert mode, and I'm going to do dot scopes, and we will see the value being printed. So the value is 10 at the current location, and we can go ahead and debug stuff from here. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. I'm not going to cover the REPL, but you can do delve help if you want more information about what you can do. But let's exit. We don't want to debug this way. Anyways, we're going to improve this more. So I'm going to go ahead and close all, and we have a debugger, and debugging this way kind of works. We have the functionality to set the debugger. We can step in, step over, and do those regular stuff. But I like having a UI. I like having a UI while I debug, so I can see what's going on easily. Now this is actually really easy to add. So again, open up NeoVim, open up the plugins, going to add another plugin, and we're going to add a plugin called dapui, and we're going to import it this time using a object again, and we're going to name the plugin, which is Arcariga Nvim dapui, and that plugin has a dependency, And it depends on the plugin that we used to debug, because without the debugger we cannot have a UI. So add that, and I'm gonna fix string ending like that. So, and I'm just gonna correct this as well. I don't know why I did doubles. So let's add that. Let's save the file. Let's do a Lua reload, and let's do a packer sync to download the UI. Okay, we're done. And then we're going to go into the debugging file again. I'm gonna open it, and at this location at the top I'm gonna add a new import. So set up dapui. We're going to require it same as with the others, so require dapui, and we're going to basically we're going to use the defaults, so dapui.setup, which will trigger the default configurations. So I'm gonna go ahead and save that. By default, dapui has a toggle function that brings up the UI while we debug, but this will break our current layout with Nvim-Tree. If we bring up that UI, our NeoVim-Tree will still be there, and I feel that we don't need the navigation while we debug. So I'm gonna go ahead and change the key mapping, and this is one of the fun parts about NeoVim. I can make it do what I want. Now I'm gonna say that whenever I press Ctrl+D, I will toggle debug mode and remove Nvim-Tree because it's in the way when we debug. So make a new map, and again I want this to be in the normal mode, and I want it to trigger when I press Ctrl+D, and when I do, I want to do Nvim-Tree toggle. I want to execute that function, but I want to continue, call another function which is require dapui.toggle, and then execute that function, and then go ahead and close this, and like that. So before we save this, I need to correct that. We need to add the closing, so it's Ctrl+D. I'm going to save this file. I'm going to go ahead and close it, open up the main.go again. I'm going to place a breakpoint by Ctrl+B. Now I'm going to run it, pressing F5, enter which configuration, and I see by the arrow that it's running. And now I'm pressing Ctrl+D, and as you can see, it brings up the debugger information, the dapui. And it's a lot nicer. We can see the scoped values, and we can see the information. We can see the stack trace, and the Go routines running, and we have the REPL window down here. And it removed the Nvim-Tree, which is nice because we don't need it while debugging. So this is nice. But one other nice thing about NeoVim is that you can make it reactive. So as you traverse the bottomless pit that NeoVim is, and you will find many things that you might want to do. And one thing that is great to know is that there are something called events. Now both NeoVim triggers events and plugins also triggers events. Now, just as in JavaScript, we can subscribe or listen to these events and apply commands to trigger whenever we see them. So as a lesson, I want to make it so the dapui appears whenever I start a debugger. Now, we could simply make and change the fm command to actually run dapui, but let's trigger it on the event from the Nvim dap plugin. Now, NeoVim dap triggers two events, the before event and the after event, and you can find more information about these in their documentation. But I'm gonna add a listener to these events. So let's go ahead and do Nvim, and let's open up the debugging file, and I'm going to add my event listeners here because they're related to the debugging. Dap fires events before and after. trigger dapui when we see them. That should be clear, right? So to do this, we specify the plugin and we access the listeners, and then the name of the event. In this case, it's going to be after. And then the event initialized, and it's going to be dapui config. So whenever this happens, we're going to execute this function. And what we want to do is we want to open dapui. And we have already imported dapui here, so we can access dapui by simply doing dapui.open, and then we want to end the function. And this will make it so that the dapui opens up whenever the dap plugin has the event initialized, event triggered. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for the before, and instead of event initialized, I'm going to do event terminated, because we want to close the UI whenever Nvim dap plugin is shut down. So let's go ahead and do an end, and at this place we want to do dapui.close. So whenever the event that the dap is terminated, we want to close the UI. And one more thing is event exited. If it finishes, we also want to close it. So let's go ahead and add that. And hopefully you see here how easy it is to chain these things together and making the editor really go ahead and become the way we want it. So we have added the event listeners. I'm just going to go ahead, save the file, exit it, go inside Nvim, set the breakpoint, press F5, open the configuration, and this time you will see it ran the dapui. Now it did not remove the Nvim-Tree because we didn't tell it to. But if you want to, you can go ahead and add that as an exercise. You can also try pressing N, because remember that we still have the shortcuts. We can still, these are just new tabs that opens, and we can manage and control them the same way as everything else. So go ahead and try adding so the Nvim-Tree doesn't open up for you whenever the dap is ran. So let's be honest, what we have done so far is powerful and flexible as hell. We can make it look and do whatever we want, but it still looks like crap. So to make NeoVim look a little bit better, we can have color schemes, which modifies how NeoVim looks. Changing the color scheme will basically, it's a lot of colors you can change, and you can modify that however you want. I'm not much for styling. I have a really crappy eye. I'm colorblind, so it doesn't really help. But one cool theme that's really popular is the Dracula theme, and you can actually make NeoVim look really good by just importing that plugin, which will modify the color scheme for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to, and it's the same as always. It's the 3-step rocket. Update plugger, add a configuration file, require it in the init.lua, and you're good to go. So let's go ahead. We're going to add, and it's moficul/dracula.nvim. So once we've added that, save the file, reload the Lua file, and then, forgot to close the string, then save the file, reload the Lua file, and then packer sync, which will download Dracula for us, and then we're going to configure it. I'm going to go to the tree, add a new file called styling.lua, and I'm going to open styling.lua up, and we're going to apply the color scheme that is Dracula. And the way to do this is we type vim.cmd, and It doesn't matter if you download Dracula or any other color scheme, this is the way you apply it. You do vim.cmd, color scheme, and then the name of the downloaded color scheme. So if you have multiple ones, you can switch them out by changing the Dracula here to the name of the theme that you have found. So save the file, and then the last step, we need to require it so that NeoVim knows that it should apply the settings. So let's require styling. Let's go ahead and save this and then close it. And whenever we reload, it's gonna look a little bit different, and it's just gonna look a lot nicer. And I like this styling a lot more. Dracula looks great out of the box, and hopefully you think so as well. So that's how easy it is to apply a new color scheme. There's a lot of them out there, but I mean, Dracula is nice enough for me. We're gonna apply some quick development tools to just make it a little bit nicer. And there's a tool called Treesitter, which is used to make more advanced code highlighting and better code highlighting, basically. And at this point, you should really know what's going on when we add stuff. So I'm just gonna speed up a little bit and add and showcase some of the really cool plugins that are available. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a new requirement here, or a use here. And we will download and use something called Nvim-Tree, which I really recommend. It's a really nice plugin. Treesitter. We're actually, when this plugin runs, we're actually gonna have a custom function, and we're going to end it. And this is from their, this is from the plugins GitHub. They do recommend you to do this. I really don't know, to be honest, why. There was some kind of bug that could be happening if you don't do it this way. So we're going to do local ts update, require the plugin, and do update. And we're gonna pass in a object, and it's going to have the field with sync set to equals true. And then we're going to call and execute that function which we just created. We are requiring the plugin Nvim-Tree, and let's go ahead, let's save this file, and let's reload the Lua file. And something is wrong. Oh, so the thing that was wrong is I forgot a colon. So let's go ahead and add that, save the file, Lua reload, and then packer sync to install it. So it installed Treesitter for us. I'm gonna go ahead and close that. I'm going to jump to my configurations file, create a new file, which will be syntax highlight.lua. I'm gonna open it up, and we're going to configure the highlighter. So I'm gonna require the Treesitter configs, and I'm going to execute setup. We have to specify the parsers to use, and I want to use Treesitter whenever I am handling Go files or Lua files or Rust files, for instance. And we want to sync installation false, and I will auto install any tools needed. So, and we want to enable highlighting of the code. So enable equals true. And before we save the file, we need to add these colons here, so we don't have any syntax errors. Otherwise, NeoVim will complain. Once we added the commas, we also need to go up to the top and replace, it should be Nvim-Treesitter.configs that we set up. So save the file, go into init Lua, import the file, and by now you should really know the steps. Always the same 3 steps. So syntax highlight and let's go ahead, save the file. Let's open up main.go, and you will see that it starts downloading the Treesitter for Go because we set it to auto install. And I'm getting some errors, probably because I have them installed since before. And the Treesitter for Rust has been installed. One has failed. I'm just going to go ahead and restart it. And as you can see, the syntax highlighting now actually highlights the function names and everything looks a lot better. So Treesitter is really amazing for that advanced syntax highlighting, and I do recommend it. So we have a nice looking, it's starting to look really good actually. So I'm going to go ahead and go into plugins again. I'm going to go to the bottom, and I'm actually going to add a new plugin. And the same thing here, I'm going to add a configuration, and we're going to add telescope. Telescope is really amazing, and it allows you to search for files using grep for file names or even inside files. So I'm going to go ahead and require the plenary as a requirement. And you can find the configuration for how to install it in the GitHub. All the plugins will have a link in the description, but we need these 2. So let's go ahead, let's save it, let's reload the Lua file, let's do a packer sync. It should install the plugins, and once that's done, again we need to add a configuration for them. I'm going to add a file called filefinder.lua. I'm actually quickly going to jump to the custom keys, and inside the custom keys at the top I'm actually going to add a comment, change leader key. Now the leader key is a key that you can use to start commands, and in my case I'm going to assign the leader key to comma. So I'm going to do vim.g map leader, and I'm going to set it to comma. So whenever I press comma, it is known as the leader. So I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to go back to the file finder, and in here we will add key mappings that executes the the telescope plugin. And there's a few things that you need to know about the telescope. One of them is, so you do need ripgrep installed to properly use telescope. It's really simple to install. Basically, there's an installation instructions under GitHub. Pause the video, install it. I'm on Ubuntu, for example. It's simple as apt-get install ripgrep. Ripgrep is really amazing. You should install it. Once you have ripgrep, it's time to start key mapping the telescope. We're going to add the ability to search for files. And one thing about telescope is that it actually respects your git ignore. And I'm inside a git repository right now. I have my dotfiles here. I'm gonna go ahead and do key.map, keymap set is a function. This is another way of setting your key maps. Previously we imported the function, but we can also call it right away. So we're going to use the newly assigned leader plus ff, which will bring up telescope so we can search. Now to do that, we're going to call lua require telescope.built-in. There is other ways to execute this. You could require built-in as a variable and call the function from there. They do so on GitHub. The reason why I'm not doing it is because actually configuring becomes a lot more code. Simply calling the function like this will allow us to configure the command straight in the Lua here. so it's a little bit easier. So I'm going to call the find files, which will bring up the find file prompt. I'm going to pass in some settings such as no ignore, which will make it not follow and respect git ignore. I don't want to follow git ignore in this case. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. If you have times when you want to search unhidden files, for instance, only, and maybe not git ignored files, you can change this command, have it on another key mapping, for instance. It's all up to how you want to have it. And we're going to execute the command. We're not passing any options, so it's just going to be like that. We're also going to add live grep. Then we're also going to add a key mapping for live grep. I'm just going to go ahead, copy this because it's a lot to write, and I'm going to change it. So it's going to be leader fg, G for grep. We're going to change the function called to live grep. And actually live grep doesn't accept these configurations. I think it accepts hidden, but it does not accept the no ignore. So we're just going to call the function and execute it like this. Now at here in the top, we also need to close the command like that. So we have two new functions. And before I save this file, I need to change this to close the function. So let's save the file and let's add it to init.lua. Let's go inside init.lua and let's require the file finder script. Let's save this and let's quit. Once we've done that, we can open NeoVim again. I'm going to press my leader key, which is comma FF, and it will open up the find file search. As you can see, I can see my files here. Now, it's super fast to search for stuff, and as you can see, it's really just kind of nice to have when you're searching for stuff. Now, if I open up ripgrep, it's not going to show anything. And that's because in my case, I have git ignored all the files inside of my home folder .config, and I kind of git added the ones I want to save in my repository. I know it's strange that I have a git repository here. Sorry about the confusion. But I can show you how fast ripgrep is by going up a few steps. I'm not in my git repository anymore. I'm going to execute NeoVim, and I'm going to open the ripgrep. And ripgrep uses fuzzy searching, and whatever you search for, it's just going to be super fast. So let's see if I search for Go, for instance. You're going to see it finds a million files, but it's still super fast. So ripgrep is really recommended. So before we end things, I just want to show you one final plugin. So I'm going to go back to my .config NeoVim. I'm going to clear my screen, and I'm going to open up NeoVim again. I'm going to go inside my plugins folder, and I'm going to go page down to jump to the bottom, and I'm going to go ahead and add a status bar, which is kind of nice to have when you code sometimes. It shows you the GitHub status of the repository, what branch you are in, and a little bit more. So I'm going to use something called Nvim Lualine, and Lualine Nvim, it will also have a dependency to the dev icons. And if you didn't download them before, I really recommend you to do so, because they make it look a lot better. And I'm gonna set it as an optional. So once we have added the Lua line, let's go ahead, let's save the file, let's reload Lua file, and let's add a comma. I always forget the commas. So let's go ahead, save the file, reload Lua, and then let's go ahead and execute packer sync to download the Lua line plugin. And once that is downloaded, a lot of updates. So once that is downloaded, I'm gonna go ahead, create a new file. I'm going to call it statusbar.lua. I'm going to open it, and for this tutorial we're simply going to use the defaults, so I'm just going to require it and call the setup function so that is executed. I'm going to save that file. I'm going to go inside init.lua and I'm going to add the requirement. Now, how you structure your files is up to you. You don't have to have as many files as me. I like making a file per plugin basically, or kind of area, like the debugging file. It contains all the plugins related to debugging. It depends and it's up to you how you want to structure that. Some people have like one giant file and like that. I like having many small files. I find it easier for me to understand what is going on. So once we require that, I'm just going to go ahead and quit all and open NeoVim again, and you will see that we now have this nice looking kind of bar which shows us some information about, I'm on the master branch. I have a few changes and a little bit of information about the file. And that's really nice. By now, I think you understand how you configure and use NeoVim. There's a ton of things to learn, but we could go on installing plugins together forever, but I think it's time to kind of let you go and have you learn and practice some by yourself. There is a bunch of plugins that I can recommend. So I went ahead and reset my NeoVim to my regular configurations, just to show you a few plugins that I can really recommend. So the first one I want to recommend is something called auto pairs, and basically it's as simple as whenever you create a single bracket, it will create the counterpart for you. Just kind of a nice to have util when you code, because you will always probably want pairs. So auto pairs does that for you. Now I also have something called a buffer line, and as you can see at the top here, it shows me my current open buffers, so I can navigate easily between them. Also, I have something called indent backline, which is basically just for showing me the indentations of the code. It can be really nice to see how many indents there is on each row. I can also really recommend float term, which is this one, which allows you to open up a terminal as a pop-up. But more than that, it allows you to open up a terminal with other programs running, such as lazy git, for instance, if you want to have a git integration into the NeoVim. So if I go ahead and do leader G, for example, I open up a float term with lazy git running. Here I can see changes and control what's going on inside of my Git repository on my machine. And one other thing that I really recommend, as you can see, I'm getting a few errors here because I'm running a linter. And linters are really important and I love them. So I can really recommend a plugin called Nvim-Linter. It allows you to set up, as you can see here, I have a linter for cargo and I can configure it. I also have linters for Golang, and I can configure them and add many linters this way, and it's really easy to just kind of have them running. And what I have done here is that whenever I save a file, it will run the linter for me. I can really recommend Nvim-Lint. There's also a plugin called Trouble, which I can recommend. Now Trouble allows you to have a trouble tab, such as this one. I can see the current errors inside of my file, and it's just really handy. And Trouble also allows you to navigate using it. So if I open up Trouble again, it brings me to the trouble, and if there were multiple troubles here, we could jump between them, and that's really nice. And as you can see here, I have a to-do which is highlighted, and that is another thing that I really recommend. To-do highlights. You can add different tags. It doesn't have to be a to-do. It can be a bug or a hack or any other tag that is supported. And one thing about that is that it is actually supported with Telescope. So not only can you add them to your code, but you can also search for them inside of Telescope. So what I've done is that whenever I press my leader key and FT, for instance, it brings up this to-do, and I can search for to-dos here. So it allows you to find to-dos using Telescope as well. Remember that Telescope respects git ignore files, so I won't see mine because I have git ignored it. Also, I can recommend tag bar. Tag bar is what we see here. It's a code overview basically. You can see the main function, you can see all your functions because it tags the code. So you can really outline the code in a nice way, and it makes it easy to navigate in large files because you can jump to them using this tag bar, and I really recommend it. We have learned how to use NeoVim. There is of course much more to learn about NeoVim, but I think that if you start using it daily, you will kind of get to a point where you learn how to use it efficiently. So far we have covered the most needed basics and the needed knowledge to kind of get started using NeoVim. You shouldn't have a problem using NeoVim after this, I think, and you should be familiar with how to install plugins, and I can really recommend you to go out there and search for plugins, and hey, even build your own plugins maybe. So after this tutorial, I think we should be familiar with navigating NeoVim using normal mode and insert mode. You should be familiar with how you execute commands in Vim, and you should be familiar with how to add plugins and how to configure them, and really handling plugins using Packer should basically be easy. Now, I really do recommend you to look up how to set up linters and formatters, and a hint is Mason kind of has support for this, so it's a good tip. Now, it will come as a good practice for you to install a few plugins on your own to make it really stick. Try setting up a linter maybe for your favorite language, or kind of start configuring it to work for your favorite language. All of the plugins that we have covered are generic, so they work for all the languages. You just have to install the language server, for instance. There are often plugins in NeoVim which can help you set up things as well. So for instance, for an awesome Go experience in NeoVim, you can look up a repository called X-Ray Go, which installs a ton of stuff for you that is just really nice to have when you develop using Go in NeoVim. The con of those packages though are that they often contain a lot of stuff, and from my experience, at least what I feel, when I install them, I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea about the features to use, the key mappings they add. It's usually like kind of overwhelming, and I like adding my own stuff as I need them, and while I work with it, I kind of get these ideas like, oh, I need a key mapping to do this, and I can add it as I go. If you have trouble following this guide, you can find my dotfiles at my GitHub. I will put a link to all the plugins that are used inside of the description here. You can also find a written tutorial. Basically, it's the same thing that we have done, but in a written format on my blog as well. If you liked this video, please feel free to like and subscribe my channel. Feel free to reach out to me if there's anything you're wondering about, or if you want to say that you like my video, or if you want to say that it sucked. Feel free. Please leave feedback so I can improve my channel in the future. Hopefully you feel comfortable with NeoVim, and what can I say? Go out, build yourself a dream editor. I'm constantly changing mine. Try joining a community. I'm using the NeoVim channel on Reddit a lot. People are super helpful, and you don't have to feel any worries about asking questions. We've all been new. I'm still kind of new to NeoVim, and I'm just constantly learning, and I hope you will as well. Take care, and bye.